The Colosseum is a lie. We were taught it was the ultimate punishment, the peak of Roman cruelty. But there was a fate far worse, a sentence that made hardened criminals beg for the mercy of a quick death in the arena, a punishment designed to break a human being slowly, piece by piece, in absolute obscurity, a punishment that was also the engine of the empire. This is the story of the darkness beneath the glory. This is the story of the mines. You had just been handed the worst punishment the ancient world ever devised, a sentence so terrifying that hardened criminals beg for the mercy of a quick execution in the Colosseum. We are conditioned to believe that the arena was the ultimate theater of Roman cruelty. We picture the sand soaked in crimson, the roar of 50,000 spectators, the gladiator raising his gladius to the emperor's box. It is the cinematic nightmare we all know. But history is often curated to show us the spectacle, while hiding the grinding, industrial machine that made it possible. The arena was a place of death, yes, but it was a death with an audience, a death with a perverse sort of dignity. For the vast majority of Rome's condemned, the Colosseum was never an option. The arena was the merciful exit. The mines were the living death. This is a story of the darkness beneath the empire, a story of a punishment designed to break a human being slowly, piece by piece, in absolute obscurity, until there was nothing left but a tool made of meat and bone. To understand the true horror of Damnatio ad Metalla, we must first strip away our modern sensibilities regarding justice. When we think of prison today, we imagine concrete walls, barred windows, perhaps a chance at rehabilitation, or at least a date of release. To the Roman mind, this concept would have been laughably absurd. Prisons like the infamous Tullianum in Rome were merely holding pens, damp waiting rooms where you sat in terror until your actual punishment began. Rome was not interested in fixing you. Rome was interested in extracting value from you or erasing you entirely. And with the mines, they perfected a method to do both simultaneously. The moment the judge pronounced your sentence, a legal guillotine severed you from humanity. You underwent what Roman law called capitis deminutio maxima, the supreme loss of status. Your citizenship revoked. Your property seized by the imperial treasury. Your marriage annulled as if it never happened. Your children no longer yours. You were legally dead. The Roman legal scholar Ulpian, writing with the cold detachment of a bureaucrat, noted that those condemned to the mines lost their liberty and citizenship by virtue of the punishment itself, even before they took a single step toward the mines. You were a ghost before you even left the courtroom. You were reclassified from a person to an instrument, an object owned by the state with the same rights as a rusted pickaxe or a wooden cart. Common criminals received the sentence, certainly, but so did political rivals who grew too loud, prisoners of war who refused to kneel, and increasingly Christians who refused to burn incense to the emperor. Early Christian writers like Tertullian and Cyprian did not mince words. They called this what was state-sponsored murder stretched across years of agonizing labor. But why the mines? Why not just execute everyone? The answer is cold, hard economics. The Roman Empire was a beast that fed on minerals. It needed silver to mint the denarius that paid the legions. It needed gold to gild the temples of the gods. It needed iron for the gladius and the pilum, lead for the plumbing that kept Rome hydrated, and marble to build the monuments that would make emperors immortal. Obtaining these resources was deadly work. It required digging into the bowels of the earth where the air turned toxic and the rock was unstable. Free laborers died too quickly, and they demanded wages. The solution was elegant in its cruelty, combined the need for punishment with the insatiable demand for production. The silver mines of Rio Tinto in Spain, the gold veins of Dacia, the granite quarries of Mons Claudianus in Egypt. These were not just prisons. They were the engines of the global economy. Every time a Roman citizen bought a loaf of bread, the coin in his hand carried the invisible weight of a prisoner's last breath. The horror began with the journey. If you were sentenced in Rome to the mines of Spain, you face an 800-mile march that makes the Bataan Death March look like a stroll. You were chained at the neck and ankles, the iron biting into your skin with every step, tethered to a line of other walking corpses. There were no wagons for condemned. You walked, day after day, week after week, through the blistering heat of the Italian summer and the freezing winds of the mountain passes. The guards viewed you as inventory, and damaged inventory was discarded. If you stumbled from exhaustion, you were dragged until your skin was raw. If you could no longer be dragged, you were beaten. If you could not rise after the beating, a sword ended your misery right there on the roadside. It was not uncommon for convoys to arrive at the mines with 30 to 40% fewer prisoners than they started with. The historian Diodorus Siculus described these arrivals. Men and women who were already half dead, their spirits shattered before they had even lifted a hammer. And then you arrived. The first thing to assault you was not the sight of the mine, but the smell. It was a physical wall of stench, a nauseating cocktail of sulfur, rotting flesh, unwashed bodies, human waste, and the acrid smoke of thousands of oil lamps burning animal fat. It was a smell so thick you could taste it, a stench of despair that made new arrivals retch until their stomachs were empty. Then your eyes adjusted to the gloom, and you saw the workers. They were skeletal figures, their skin specifically gray from lack of sunlight and covered in the grime of the earth. Their bodies were road maps of trauma. Skeletal remains excavated from Roman mining sites tell a forensic story of absolute brutality. Shattered vertebrae from carrying impossible loads, bones deformed by malnutrition, and skulls bearing the healed fractures of beatings. The Greek geographer Agatharchides, who visited the gold mines of Egypt, left us a chilling account of what he saw. He wrote, "Those condemned to mines are worked continuously, both by day and by night. No relaxation is given to the sick, no consideration for the weak, no mercy for the aged or for women. All are compelled by blows to keep working until, overcome by ill treatment, they die in the midst of their torments." He noted that these wretches looked upon the future as more dreadful than the present and welcomed death as a lover. The work itself was a descent into hell. In the underground shafts, you would climb down ladders that plunged hundreds of feet into the earth, leaving the light of the sun behind as a distant memory. The only illumination came from tiny clay oil lamps that fit in the palm of your hand. They cast flickering, weak shadows that barely revealed the rock face inches from your nose, and they consumed the precious little oxygen available in the shaft, replacing it with thick black smoke. The heat was suffocating. In deep shafts, the geothermal gradient combined with the lack of ventilation meant temperatures could soar to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The humidity turned the air into a heavy blanket. Men collapsed from heat stroke within hours, their bodies shutting down as they boiled from the inside out. You were given a small iron pick, a hammer, or sometimes nothing but your bare hands and a basket. Your quota was not based on what a human could do. It was based on what the empire required. You worked in chains, always in chains. The irons were not just to prevent escape. Where would you go in the middle of the desert? But to enforce a brutal synchronization. You moved as one struggling organism. If the mine collapsed, the chains ensured that no one ran. The Romans calculated that the loss of a single prisoner was negligible, but the chains ensured that if the roof came down, it took a group, simplifying the accounting. The very air you breathed was a weapon. In the silver and gold mines, the rock was rich in silica. As you hammered against the face, fine dust filled the stagnant air, coating your lungs with microscopic shards of glass. This led to silicosis, a disease where the lungs scar over and harden, literally turning to stone. Within months, you would begin coughing up blood. Within 2 years, you would be drowning on dry land, gasping for breath that your petrified lungs could not process. But the slow death of silicosis was a luxury compared to the sudden violence of a cave-in. The Roman engineering method for breaking hard rock was called fire setting. They would build a fire against the rock face, heating the stone until it was glowing red, and then splash it with cold water and vinegar. The thermal shock would shatter the rock, allowing it to be pried away. But this process destabilized the entire mountain. It cracked the structural integrity of the tunnel. Sections of the roof would collapse without a whisper warning, burying entire shifts of workers alive. When a collapse happened, there was no rescue mission. The Romans did not dig you out. They simply sealed off that section of the tunnel to contain the smell of decomposition and opened a new shaft a few yards away. The collapsed tunnel became your tomb. Archaeological excavations at Rio Tinto have uncovered these time capsules. Human remains found crushed beneath tons of rock, still wearing their leg irons, their skeletal hands still gripping their tools, buried exactly where they died 2,000 years ago. For food, you receive a mockery of a ration. Diodorus described it as the barest portion of bread and dirty water, perhaps 1,200 calories a day. Yet, the labor you were performing burned upwards of 4,000 to 5,000 calories. It was simple biological math. Your body began to cannibalize itself. You were being starved to death while working at maximum exertion. Prisoners lost a third of their body weight in the first 6 months. Muscles withered, fat reserves vanished, and strong men were reduced to walking shadows. The barracks where you slept were called ergastula, a word also used for livestock pens. These were underground dungeons with no ventilation and no sanitation. You slept on the stone floor, chained to dozens of others, lie in your own filth. Disease was the only thing that flourished here. Dysentery, typhus, and gangrene from untreated wounds swept to the barracks like wildfire. There were no doctors for the damnati. If you fell sick, you were whipped until you stood up. If you could not stand, you were left to die. The average survival time was 6 months to 3 years. To survive longer was a miracle, or perhaps a curse. Who were these people? The Roman bureaucracy was famous for its record-keeping. Yet they kept almost no records of the damnati. This was part of the erasure. We do not know their names because the state decided they no longer had names. But fragments of their humanity have survived against the odds. We know from Christian martyrologies of people like Potamiena of Alexandria, a woman condemned to the Egyptian mines, and the 40 martyrs sent to the Pheno copper mines in Arabia. We have letters from Bishop Cyprian, who wrote to imprisoned Christians trying to offer spiritual armor against physical annihilation. He wrote, "The world regards you as already dead, but in reality, you are more alive than those who condemned you." You can hear the desperate need to find meaning in his words. We also have the accidental survivors of bureaucracy. A papyrus scrap from Egypt records a man named Serapion, condemned at Metalla for theft. That is all we know. Serapion. Did he have children? Did he steal bread to feed them? How long did he last in the dark? The history books are silent. But the walls of the mines themselves are not silent. Modern archaeology is finally giving a voice to these ghosts. Deep in the tunnels of Rio Tinto and Laurium, explorers have found graffiti scratched into the rock face. Messages from men who knew they would never see the sun again. At Rio Tinto, there are tally marks carved into the stone. Someone was counting the days. One set of marks reaches 237 before stopping abruptly. Did he die on day 238? Did he lose the will to count? We will never know. At Laurium in Greece, a message carved in crude Greek simply reads, "Remember us." 2 words, a plea thrown across 2 millennia, begging the future not to forget. Perhaps the most heart-wrenching evidence concerns the children. Roman law was ruthless in its collective punishment. If a head of household was condemned, his family could be dragged down with him. Wives, sons, daughters, even infants could be sentenced to the mines. Excavations have revealed the skeletal remains of children as young as 8 or 10 years old, their small bones showing the same stress fractures and trauma as the adults. Imagine a child growing up in that darkness, knowing nothing of the world above, their small hands calloused from hauling baskets of what had fueled an empire they would never see. This was not an anomaly. This was systematic. This was Roman justice. Now, let us return to the Colosseum and recalibrate what we think we know. The arena was not an alternative to the mines. It was a completely different ecosystem. Damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts, was reserved mostly for common criminals and was designed as a lunch break spectacle. These executions took place at midday, the intermission between the beast hunts of the morning and the gladiator duels of the afternoon. Seneca the Younger described stumbling upon one of these sessions. "I come home more greedy, more cruel, and inhuman because I have been among human beings." It was pure murder. The men had nothing to protect them. In the arena, unarmed prisoners were thrown to lions, bears, or leopards. It was brutal, terrifying, and public, but it was fast. Death came in minutes. A crushed skull, a torn throat. The end was swift. Compare that mercy to the mines. The Romans debated which was worse. Some legal texts argued that the beasts were a lighter sentence because the suffering ended quickly. Others felt the shame of public mauling was worse. But the key difference was purpose. The arena was about spectacle and deterrence. It cost money to stage. The mines were about profit. The arena consumed wealth. The mines created it. Gladiators, contrary to popular belief, were not usually condemned criminals sent to die. They were professional athletes, expensive investments who received medical care, massages, and high-protein diets. Their owners wanted them to survive and fight again. There is virtually no evidence of a prisoner in the mines being promoted to the arena, a man broken by 6 months of starvation, and silica dust would make for a terrible fight. The systems were separate. If you went to the mines, you stayed in the mines. By 325 AD, the Emperor Constantine issued a law suggesting that judges should condemn criminals to the mines rather than the arena. This wasn't a humanitarian gesture. It was a PR move. As Christianity grew, public executions of martyrs were generating too much sympathy. The crowds were starting to root for the victims. The mines were better because they were invisible. The public didn't have to watch the suffering. The condemned would simply vanish into the earth, generating revenue while they rotted. It was the ultimate bureaucratic solution. Out of sight, out of mind, and profitable to the last drop of blood. Let's zoom out and look at the scale of this machine. The Roman Empire operated dozens of major mining complexes. Rio Tinto, Laurium, Dacia, Mons Claudianus, the copper mines of Cyprus, the lead mines of Britain. Conservative estimates suggest that over the course of 4 centuries, hundreds of thousands of people were condemned ad Metalla. Some scholars argue the number exceeds 1 million. That is 1 million human beings erased from history, their lives converted into bullion that funded the Pax Romana. And it worked. From a purely imperial perspective, it was a stroke of genius. The silver from Spain paid for the legions that conquered the known world. The gold from Dacia, conquered by Trajan in 106 AD, was so abundant that it funded the construction of Trajan's Forum and Trajan's Market. Architectural marvels that tourists still photograph today. The marble of the Pantheon? It likely came from Mons Claudianus, cut by a prisoner who died of thirst in the Egyptian desert. The lead pipes that brought fresh water to the fountains of Rome? Mined by men who suffocated in toxic tunnels. Every pillar of Roman civilization, every triumph of engineering, rests on a foundation of bones. The Romans were not ignorant of this. They did not stumble into this system by accident. They were meticulous. They calculated the economics of calorie intake versus ore output. They adjusted sentencing guidelines based on labor shortages. When the mines in Spain needed more bodies, conviction rates for minor crimes in Rome mysteriously spiked. When a new quarry opened, the courts became suddenly severe. Tacitus, the great historian, casually mentions that Emperor Tiberius deported thousands to mines, noting it as a matter of population management rather than tragedy. He does express horror. He expresses efficiency. This system was codified in law. Jurists wrote entire treatises on the proper administration of the Damnatio. They debated legal technicalities with sickening detachment. For instance, whether a pregnant woman should be sentenced immediately or after she gave birth. The consensus? Wait until a child is born, condemn the mother to mines, and send the infant to be raised as a slave of the state. This was the logic of a civilized society. This was the grandeur that was Rome. Today, the Colosseum still stands, a hollow shell visited by millions. We buy tickets, we take selfies, we marvel at the archways. But the mines? They are abandoned holes in the ground, reclaimed by nature. There are no ticket booths at Rio Tinto's ancient shafts. There are no tour guides at Mons Claudianus. There are only the silence and the occasional discovery of a skeleton still wearing its chains. The condemned of Rome died twice, once in the dark and again in our collective memory. So, what do we do with this history? It is tempting to look at the Romans as monsters, as ancient barbarians separated from us by time and evolution. We tell ourselves we have evolved beyond such cruelty, but that is a dangerous comfort. What made Damnatio ad Metalla possible was not that the Romans were monsters. It was that they were human. They were capable of the same mental gymnastics we see in every era of history. The ability to convince oneself that those people are not really people, that they are resources, that they are tools. The Romans saw themselves as the light of the world, the bringers of law and order. They built roads. They wrote poetry. They invented concrete. And they justified the absolute destruction of millions of lives as the necessary cost of that civilization. When you walk through the ruins of Rome today, when you look up at the dome of the Pantheon, remember the invisible history beneath it. Remember that the glory of the empire was not just built on the genius of architects or the bravery of legions. It was built on the slow, agonizing erasure of the forgotten. The crowd in the Colosseum was loud. The roar of 50,000 voices is hard to ignore. But the silence of the minds was absolute. And it is that silence, the heavy, suffocating silence of the erased, the condemned, the damnati, that should echo the loudest. Because history is not just about the monuments that remain standing in the sun. It is about the people who were buried in the dark to build them. If you believe that these are the stories that deserve to be told, the stories of the silence rather than the victors, then make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Share this video with someone who thinks they know Roman history, because every empire has a price, and that price is always paid by those whose names we are never meant to know. Please like and subscribe my YouTube channel History Quest Archives for more video.